sharing the webinar this evening. Before I hand across to the project team to run you through various aspects of the proposals, do a bit of housekeeping first. In terms of the structure, the project team are going to run through the proposals, then we'll have the Q&A after, just to make it flow a bit easier and to stop it being a little bit clunky. We had some great feedback from the session yesterday, so really looking forward to tonight's session. I think at this point, it's probably best to hand over to the project team, and just reminding that this session is being recorded, so please bear that in mind. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Rob. So we should probably do some introductions to begin with. So I'm Luke Raystrick of Centro Planning Consultancy. Annie, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Annie Webb. I work with Luke at Centro Planning Consultancy.
And I'm Adrian Vick from GML Architects. We are the architects who've been developing the scheme.
Terrific. And then also part of the team on this slide here, we've got Turkington Martin, who aren't able to make the call tonight, but they're the landscape architects working on the project. Next slide, please, Rob. Thanks. So the site, as you well know, is the former substation that was linked to the East Finchley Underground station and historically contained all the switchgear and you know, and all the gubbins that made the Northern Line run. But it has been derelict and unused for many years now, and the site's become really overgrown. The site, as you'll well know, also is really well located from a sustainability point of view, in that it's on the edge of East Finchley town centre and obviously very close to the tube station as well. But it's not really contributing anything to the town centre or sort of really living up to its potential. One thing that you may not be aware of, though, is that the building, not only was it designed to house all of the electric gear, but it was also designed as the retaining structure for the railway, for the Northern Line embankment, and it still acts, you know, it still functions in that way. What has happened, though, is over the years, it's becoming more and more difficult to maintain and upkeep. And so TfL, who have sold the land to our clients, would need to install a new independent retaining wall to hold up the railway embankment. And therefore, the building would need to be demolished, whether a development proposal was coming forward or not. And then just the final thing to say is that, again, you may not, or you may be aware that the council is currently consulting on its draft local plan, and the site has been identified for comprehensive redevelopment for residential flats and commercial floor space. So I'll hand over to Adrian at this point, unless you want me to take this one, Adrian.
And I can take over from this point. So this is now starting to look at the actual context that the site sits within. So you can see in the centre of this slide, there's a map of the wider area of East Finchley, the train station being pretty much in the centre of that image, highlighted in pink. Now, we are actually to the south of the railway tracks, which makes it feel a little bit as if it's to the outside of the town centre. That said, I think it's safe to describe it as a linear continuation of the town centre in terms of its uses, and there's a natural progression of commercial and town centre uses, which goes from the north of railway tracks south along Great North Road. So on this particular slide, you can see that we are essentially to the southeast of the railway station at the top of Bishop's Avenue. Bishop's Avenue is within a conservation area. So we are, the context of this site is essentially adjoining to the edge of a conservation area. So it has certain sensitivities in terms of outlook and aspect with regard to conservation area. it's also quite an interesting confluence of different architectural styles, I think is a reasonable way to describe it. As you can kind of see from the examples on the right-hand side of this slide, you have various different architectural typologies ranging from residential uses sort of further to the south, going through to the town centre to the north. So it's quite a mixed site in terms of it being essentially a crossroads, really. So yeah, onto the next slide. So taking that idea of it being at a crossroads and a site which has various different contextual inputs in terms of how to approach the design and where our starting points would be. There's a number of technical aspects, and there's also a number of townscape and also a number of environmental and landscaping aspects that all need to be put into the pot in terms of architectural and design influences, which start to inform how we build up the design of the proposals here, which we've been doing in conjunction with the local authority through the pre-app process. So looking at these diagrams, these little thumbnails essentially take us through the key aspects of what we've been thinking about when we've been developing the design. Starting on the left-hand side, as Luke alluded to, there's this technical consideration with regards to the building and the retaining wall, which forms part of the existing structure, which actually holds up the embankment of the railway lines. So the little slide on the little thumbnail on the left-hand side shows how the first step of a design evolutionary approach would be to demolish a building because of its degrading condition. So in such a way that there could be a meaningful maintenance and a safe maintenance of that retaining wall, which you can see in brown, which surrounds the back of the site. Part of that maintenance strategy, which is a requirement of TfL, is to have a 3 metre essentially buffer strip, which would be used for maintenance. So any new proposal is set within a setback from 3 metres from the retaining wall. So that's step one. Step two then is to provide an active frontage. So that's number 2 on these thumbnails. So you can see here highlighted in purple is an element of active frontage at ground floor, which would then be essentially a continuation of the high street and the town centre uses. So that would be introducing an element of retail space, which would then essentially continue the high street to the south of the railway tracks. The next step on from that is to build upon that with essentially a community working hub. So this is really looking at a mixed-use development with essentially a workspace, a community workspace, which would be tailored to SMEs, small startup units, which we see and the developer sees very much as being the direction of travel, particularly in the context of the new work from home environment that has been fostered through obviously the necessities of the last year. So we see very much this as being small SME units, office development for small start-off offices for local employment uses. As well as that, there's also an element of residential, which you can see in number 4 here. So this is the orange highlighted block, which is to the north of the site. So this is very much a mixed use development, which brings a kind of a rich kind of meshing together of different uses, which would create vitality and interest, because this is a site which has a number of different contextual inputs in terms of it being as a crossroads. The next step on from that in terms of the layering of the design inputs is to create a generous amount of external space, because we've got this opportunity through the tiering and the stepping of the massing, which I'll describe later on in terms of why we've come about that kind of stepping process. That gives us the opportunity to have plenty of external space for the occupants of this building, which also can then go hand in hand with the landscaping approach, which is clearly a very important input in terms of the design development, given the already sort of overgrown and green sort of nature of this particular site. So that external space can then also be used to further enhance the biodiversity and the greening of this particular site. So on this next slide, we start to look at how the internal layouts are then informed by the massing and the uses that have been sort of developed in terms of the concept of the design. So top left-hand side, we've got the ground floor plan. So again, there's that commercial space, which takes up a broad amount of the frontage of the site. You can also see from here, so the red line indicates the site boundary on the ground floor. One of the things that you can see from here is that the proposed building is actually set back quite a long way from the street frontage. Now that gives us the opportunity to retain and also enhance a lot of that existing greenery and existing vegetation, which is along the pavement and the street frontage in this particular part of the Great North Road. Central to that is quite a large London plane tree, which is the largest tree that you can see there, which has actually got Great North Road written on it, so you can identify it easily from that image. So the layout of the ground floor and the fact that we're set back quite a long way from the street frontage opens up the opportunity to create a more permeable landscaped zone to this approach, essentially, to the town centre to the north of the site. So actually, I think this is quite an important point to make in terms of the sense of progression for people that are going to be walking up and down this road, because essentially there's quite a lot of footfall here of people going up to the railway station to the north, and so to open up the site from what is now currently something of a I wouldn't say hostile environment, but something which is perhaps more enclosed and not necessarily open to people kind of enjoying that space at the moment. It offers that opportunity to open it up through a comprehensive and carefully considered landscape strategy. So that's the ground floor plan. So going through the upper floors, you can see the area here are office, SME space. We've intimated how they may potentially be subdivided into smaller units. So there's the opportunity to have small units. There's the possibility for tenants to grow with their businesses. So you can start up taking one small subdivided office unit, which could potentially grow in size given the potential for an open plan floor plate. And again, to the north of the site, so here highlighted in orange is the residential element of the proposals. So we've got 9 residential units, so flatter development, of course, but all generous sized, with the opportunity of being family sized units, and all through flats. So essentially they are dual aspect, which gives you the maximum potential for cross ventilation, and also fantastic views to the north across the railway lines and across to Cherry Tree Woods. So fantastic views from the upper levels across to the greenery that you have through Cherry Tree Woods. And that's why we've specifically raised up the residential portion going from 2nd floor upwards. So below that, you essentially have this plinth of office and workspace where you don't have that dual aspect and that great view across to Cherry Tree Woods. So yes, next slide. So this is starting to explain a bit of the rationale behind the massing and the volumetric design of the scheme. So here you have the proposals in the centre of the site. So at the crossroads of Bishops Avenue and Great North Road. So you can kind of get a sense of this stepping and progression of massing, going from the smaller scale residential street scene, which is sort of two, 3 stories, to the south of the site, going up when you start going into these commercial uses. So here you can see the commercial uses on the eastern side of Great North Road are highlighted in blue. And that's when you start having this stepping stone in massing, going up in progressing in height to the full 6 stories of the quite significant, from a townscape perspective, mass of McDonald's House to the north of the railway station, and so that kind of sets the scene in terms of our elevational and volumetric approach to that stepping of going from 4 to 5 to 6 stories, culminating in the town centre to the north. And so this slide is looking at a little bit more detail of really the perception of how people would sense the scheme within the context of this townscape, particularly when walking up and down Great North Road. So here we've essentially done a comparative section of the scheme, which is obviously on the left-hand side here. So you can see it's highlighted as the site, and the equivalent street scene to the right-hand side or the western side of Great North Road. So this is Cherry Tree Hill House, which is the mixed-use development to the other side, the opposing side of the road. Now, clearly that is of a smaller scale to what we are proposing here. The interesting thing with our site, partly because of the site constraints, partly because of the opportunities that offers us with the depth of the site and the fact that it already has this natural greening screen through the mature trees on the street scene, gives us the opportunity to actually have a more interesting dynamic relationship with the street, because we are set back. So we're essentially set back around 12 meters from the street edge, which compared to the other side of the road, Cherry Tree Hill House, which is a lot closer, means that when you take viewing angles to the skyline, when you look at the roofscape, you essentially have a broadly similar relationship with a line of sight through to the sky, because of the very fact that we are set that far back from the street itself. And again, that also offers the opportunity for this fantastic green buffer, which helps improve the public realm for pedestrians on their way through to the railway station. Interestingly, you can also see on the slide in the background, there's what's annotated as Varma House. So Varma House is the next block, which is a commercial block, immediately to the south of our site. Now that has got a planning permission for an extra 2 floors on top of it. So you can see here on this section, the darker grey to the bottom is the existing building, and the lighter grey above is the approved additional massing. Now, when you take that same sectional relationship through the street scene, you can see that actually Varma House is quite a bit closer to the road. So the perceived massing of a building, which is in fact lower in overall height, is much more so, and it creates more of a canyon effect when you have that and Cherry Tree Hill House on the other side of the road. So the very fact that we've got quite a generous depth of site and that we can push our massing back further towards the railway line itself means that you have a more comfortable relationship with the street scene. And so these are really just working through some of those visualizations and how you actually get to perceive that within the street scene itself. So here I think you get a sense of some of the things that I've kind of touched upon in terms of the stepping of the massing. So going from south to north, you've got this natural progression which is going towards the railway line. There's the fact that we're set back and that there's this improved green buffer zone, this screen to the road itself, which has the opportunity of being both better maintained and opened up to public use in terms of, or a better public perception of the public realm whilst going through this part of the Great North Roads. which also is going to be further opened up with that retail space at ground floor. So there is that permeability and that greater sort of use of the public space. And the next view after this is taken from Bishop's Avenue. So this is one of the key views from the conservation area. So Bishop's Avenue is quite an interesting one because it has this gentle curve to it. And so this is reaching the end of Bishop's Avenue where the building starts coming into sight. So for the majority of Bishop's Avenue before that, you don't actually see the site because of this gentle curve in it. And I think you get a sense here of a natural landmark acting as a backstop to this key view, essentially. And the next slide then is taken from the other side. So this is from Cherry Tree Woods, which is the park on the other side of the railway line. And I think it's important to kind of take this and really test this view, which is what we've been doing with local authority with regards to kind of massing and also the texture of the materiality and the kind of the aesthetic approach of what we're kind of looking at with regards to materials. So it's very much a sort of New London vernacular approach, which is a strong brick aesthetic, which builds upon traditional London architectural motifs, but in a contemporary form. So it's a lot sleeker, it's a lot simpler, but it's still traditional in its historical approach, I suppose. And then the top floors we've been kind of looking at carefully in terms of having a much more lightweight approach to that in terms of the perception of that with sort of more glazing, more lighter materials. So perhaps white stone cladding, for example, just to kind of create a lighter top where it starts to be perceived when it pops up out of the tree line, because that's clearly quite an important view with regards to, at the moment, it being this very green viewpoint from Cherry Tree Woods. Yeah, and then landscaping, I think here you can kind of start to get a sense of that permeability and how the landscaping strategy can be built upon to essentially create a little bit more rigor and logic and rationale to what will still be a very, very green sort of ground floor public realm, but sort of tidied up, I suppose, for want of a better description. So clearly there will be some of that greenery further inside the site, which will have to be removed through development. So because of that, we've been working closely with the local authority to look at opportunities for replacing all of that lost greenery. So one of the things that Turkington Martin, who are the landscape architects we're working with, are looking at is increasing biodiversity through the use of roof terraces. So you'd have green roofs, potentially brown roofs, which help improve that biodiverse nature at different levels throughout the site, and also further replanting to mitigate against loss of any of the smaller trees from inside the centre of the site to the north of the site. Now, clearly that's something that needs to be developed further, because there's a number of other factors which play into that, not least of all because it would be working in partnership with local authority on additional planting on their land to the north of the site on the way towards the railway bridge. And also it needs to be carefully considered in terms of the context of the cycle lane, which is in place along the road, and also any servicing requirements for the site. So there's all of these kind of factors that need to be sort of added into the mix, as it were. But all put together, they've got the opportunity to essentially create a much more pleasant environment for this particular part of the road, which at the moment is clearly a derelict site and in need of a bit more coherence. So yeah, that's landscaping. And yeah, I mean, commercial space, I think we've sort of touched on this already in terms of when we're talking about the floor plans and the layouts. So of course, ground floor, that active frontage for retail opportunity there, and the upper floors for the potential for, you know, a flexibility of different floor plates and usages. Clearly, lots of you know, potential for dual aspect, for glazing, for lots of good outlook for workspace on those upper floors.
Can I just jump in there, Adrian, and say a few words about some of this stuff? So with regards to the proposed convenience store, of course, East Finchley already has a few in Budgeons and Sainsbury's, and to name a few. But we certainly see that there is an opportunity, both in terms of giving the local community added choice and really improving the vitality and viability of East Finchley Town Centre through the introduction of a new operator. And certainly there are operators that aren't represented within the district centre, and people at the moment may be jumping in their cars and driving further afield to get to some of these facilities, for example the Waitrose in Muswell Hill. So we think if we can bring an extra operator to the district centre, it will help keep people within the local area, who may then spend money in other stores rather than that expenditure leaking out to other centres. So that's the premise behind the new convenience store. In terms of the office space, as Adrian has said, the pandemic has of course transformed the way that people are working, and that's going to continue into the long term. So certainly there's a real fantastic opportunity now, particularly given the location within the town centre or on the edge of the town centre and next to the tube station, to provide a new work hub for the local community who may not be necessarily commuting into central London every day. They might want to spend 2-3 of those days working close to where they live. So this facility will certainly provide that opportunity for the local community. And we certainly see it, as I say, being a local community, the sort of facility that people would walk to or cycle to. And it's certainly not the intention that this would be some kind of headquarters in the way that McDonald's House is a headquarters, you know, a national headquarters. Thanks, Rob. In terms of the sustainability, Adrian's already touched upon, of course, the principle of retaining as many of those trees as we possibly can, and the ones that we are retaining along the front generally are what we call the category A and the category B trees. The ones that are generally being lost are category C and below. Now, so you know, that will obviously help in terms of landscape and air quality and biodiversity. But we're also looking to introduce biodiverse roofs on all of the roof spaces within the development. What we're also looking to do is introduce sustainable urban drainage systems. So rather than rainwater hitting the roofs of the building and running straight into the sewers, that rainwater gets held on the site for longer and attenuates it and releases the water into the sewers more slowly. So it takes pressure off the sewage system. The dual and triple aspect layouts, that's really important, because if you have, say, single aspect units, then in the summer they do have a tendency to overheat, and people then install AC or mechanical ventilation to try and cool them down. What you get through dual and triple aspect is cross ventilation, natural cross ventilation. So you're then less reliant on air conditioning and mechanical ventilation, which of course has a carbon footprint. Then in terms of the building materials and their thermal efficiency, then looking in the winter time, if you're heating up your flat, you don't want all of that heat to simply leak away. So being able to contain the heat within the flat again reduces the carbon footprint. And then embodied carbon, which is the last principle, it's a relatively new initiative or sort of way of thinking about development. And what that's getting at is, whereas there's a carbon footprint associated with development whilst it's operational, there's historically been some neglect over, well, what are we actually building our buildings from, and what's the carbon footprint associated with the creation of those materials and actually building and constructing the development on the site. So there's choices that can be made so that you really keep down your carbon footprint in terms of materials and construction techniques and that kind of thing. So that's certainly something that we're really trying to push very hard with this development. So all in all, there's really good positive messages in terms of sustainability here. And then in terms of construction, always a bit of a concern for residents when development and therefore construction is being proposed in the immediate vicinity. What we can say, of course, is that any building contractor that's selected to take forward this project will be part of the Considerate Constructors Scheme, which is a national programme to ensure that contractors are held to account in terms of the noise and disturbance that they might otherwise create. And that'll all be wrapped up. I mean, the planning system is very geared up to ensuring that construction disruption is kept to an absolute minimum, and they do that through a document called the Construction Management Plan. So any consent will be a condition of any consent will be adherence to that construction management plan. As part of that, what we will ensure is that there's always a liaison person, neighbour liaison person within the construction team, and there'll be a hotline so that if for whatever reason neighbours think that that construction management plan isn't being adhered to, then there's a hotline that can be called and there's a person that you can speak to put that right immediately. And then finally, we'll have residents' newsletters periodically, perhaps once a month, which will just inform residents of the sorts of works that are going on and potentially where there may be unusual works or perhaps particularly noisy works during a period in a particular day. So again, very much about trying to bring the community with us with this development. So,
yeah, Luke, did you want to run through quickly the kind of potential kind of time frame before we wrap things up?
Yeah, that'd be fine. So obviously this is the first time that we're talking to the local community. So really, really keen to get everybody's feedback, because we'll obviously go through all of that feedback, look at all the suggestions that people are making, and if we can improve the scheme through those suggestions, then we absolutely will do that. So there's a process that we'll go through now to do that. There's also more conversations to be had with the council in terms of the design of the proposal and highways considerations and various other things. So we're probably looking at submitting the planning application towards the end of the summer or possibly early autumn. The planning application you would expect will be determined within, say, 3, 4, 5 months, something like that. So there's the potential that works could start on site next spring, and then you'd expect them to take anywhere between 18 to 24 months to sort of come through to completion. So that's the time frame looking forwards.
Yeah, cool, excellent. I think that probably concludes the presentation. I just wanted to say, thanks to the project team. I thought that was really thorough and really engaging. And thanks to everyone for attending. A key element, as I think Luke mentioned, of this consultation process is opening that two-way dialogue. So if there are any questions that you guys want to keep on sending in, please do. But for the meantime, we're going to go with the ones we've had so far. We're going to do them in a sequential order. The first one is, what's driving the need for mixed use? Luke, that's probably one in your remit.
Yeah, sure. So certainly we didn't set out to achieve mixed use. What we set out to do is deliver uses for which there is a need. And through doing that, it just so happens that we do need to deliver a mix of uses. So as I've said, we certainly see that there's a need for more representation within the convenience food sector here. We certainly see that there's a need for a community work hub. And then, of course, there's a need also for some homes. So hopefully the community will agree that we're delivering something for everybody.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that, Luke. The next question was about height, and more specifically, why is there not at all a residential element?
Probably one for Adrian.
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things that we have to be mindful in terms of height is that there's very important key views both from the west and from the east, and also perhaps to a lesser extent up and down the Great North Road from the north and the south. Starting from the west, from Bishop's Avenue, there's a clear sensitivity to the view out of the conservation area and this backdrop to what is essentially a residential setting in the conservation area. So as that backdrop, we wanted to have something which is essentially a landmark which is prominent and an important feature, which is a clear backdrop, but not something which is too high and too out of keeping with that kind of residential context when viewed from the west. And perhaps even more importantly, from the other side, so from the east, when you're looking at the site across the railway tracks from Cherry Tree Woods, you really get that sense when you kind of see that visualization, which has been done. It's quite a detailed CGI visualization from the sort of artists involved with this process. That you start, any more height, and you start creeping up above the tree canopy in a way that would start to be quite noticeable. Whereas I think so here you can see on the right hand side of what is visible, that's the residential block, and anything above that, and it starts to be like noticeable, and you kind of your eye is drawn to it. Where it is at the moment, I think it's sufficiently set within the context of that tree line that it kind of works in terms of a composition. Anything higher than that, and it feels like it would start to be a little bit too prominent. So I think that was the kind of thinking that we that informed the height really of the residential block.
Cool, thanks for that, Adrian. I think we've got another question. It's probably a bit of a technical one, so not sure if we'll have the answer at the moment, but how will the access road function with the future traffic lights to the Bishop's Avenue junction that are going to be funded by the development north of the bridge? Do we have any kind of insight on that at all?
What was that? Luke, are you on mute?
I'm muted, yeah.
Okay. Wouldn't
Apologies.
be a webinar without someone muting someone.
So yeah, absolutely, that's something we're well aware of and are working through the council's highways department with at the moment. We're also, so that's one of the challenges we've got in terms of servicing and getting vehicles onto the site. The other one, of course, is the new cycle route that's been installed as well. So there's various details that we're trying to work out with the highways department at the moment. We don't have a final answer yet, but certainly they'll be very keen to ensure that it all functions properly, as will we.
Yeah, excellent, great. Thanks for that, Luke. There's been another comment as well, / question that we've had about there's a number of good local stores on the high road that are well used already. And I think you probably touched on this a little bit, Luke, in your commentary. There's a concern that the new kind of convenience store might undermine the current high road offering. East Finchley apparently famously said no to a new Waitrose some years ago. I mean, from what you were saying, we don't think there's going to be that kind of conflict there. It's going to be an addition and a kind of complement to it rather than a competitive nature.
Yes, as I say, that we certainly see that there is an opportunity. I mean, I used Waitrose as just one example of an operator that isn't represented on the high street. I'm not for 1 minute saying that is the operator. There isn't an operator lined up yet, but and it may well be that the operator is independent. So it's too early to say at the moment, who that operator would be. But as I say, we certainly think that there is an opportunity. But I mean, this is why we do these consultation events, to sound out the local community and really try and find out, well, what do you think is perhaps missing from the high street? What could complement it? And we can take those ideas away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of people joined a little bit later in the presentation, and potentially missed a few aspects earlier on. Would you guys be able to elaborate again on kind of why we weren't kind of keeping the existing structure and we were looking to demolish?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So our client, who's in the process of acquiring the site from Transport for London, one of the conditions of the sale is that a new independent retaining structure is built to prop up the railway embankment, because as things stand at the moment, the building actually performs that function and has been doing for over 100 years. So that is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain for TfL. Logistically, it's very difficult to maintain a structure, a retaining structure, when it forms part of a building. So TfL very keen for there to be an independent wall that will, act as that structure into the long term, and have a 3-meter maintenance strip all the way along that wall. So by the time you've done all of that demolition work to make the space for that wall, there really is very little, if any, building left at all. So that's the reason for it.
Excellent, thanks for that, Luke. That was really comprehensive. Another question's come in about, are we aiming for zero carbon?
We certainly are aiming for zero carbon. It's quite a technological challenge at the moment for developments to be zero carbon in terms of the fabric and renewable technologies within the development itself. It may well be possible that we can get pretty close, but whether we can get completely to zero carbon, I think is possibly a step too far with where technology is at the moment. That said, certainly the Mayor's policy is for where you can't meet zero carbon, that shortfall is made up through a financial contribution, which is provided to the GLA, and that gets pooled and allows the government, GLA, the council, to deliver other renewable initiatives. So on balance, there's a net carbon zero effect as a result of it.
Cool, excellent. I think that's probably it in terms of the questions at the moment, unless anybody has anything else. We've got a few comments around the waste and refuse arrangements that need to be first class to make sure that they don't encroach on the streets. There's also some concern about flooding recently in basement parking on Cherry Tree Hill House. But I think that probably encompasses everything. I
can say a few words on the waste and refuse. I mean, absolutely. Barnet have very strict, well, as do every London borough, have very strict guidelines for new developments in terms of the amount of bin space that's provided. So certainly we'd be looking to either hit or exceed that. So we can certainly give you comfort that there won't be lack of capacity and therefore, bin bags left strewn all over the street. And also, I saw there was a comment there regarding the basement of Cherry Tree Hill House being flooded. Just to say, we're certainly not proposing a basement for this development. It's all from the ground upwards.
Yeah, and there's another comment just coming in, Luke, about sort of on-street parking essentially, and that kind of being minimal with the kind of cycle path. What do we think about the cycle path? I know you mentioned it earlier on in the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, we're really keen to get public opinion of the cycle, of the new cycle route, because we know anecdotally that it has divided opinion. Some people, obviously, probably mainly the cyclists that use it, have really welcomed it, whereas others perhaps not so. So yeah, really keen to gauge public opinion on that. Certainly it's something that we're having to either work with or work around as part of our servicing strategy, getting refuse lorries in and delivery vehicles in as well.
Yeah, excellent. That's really helpful, and I think it's key to reinforce one of the kind of key elements, as I mentioned earlier, of this kind of consultation is to get you guys feedback that have attended. So please do visit the website. There is a feedback form element on there now. We'd love to hear your views, and there's also a section for you just to write your thoughts more generally rather than just answering the question specifically. I'll give it another couple of minutes to see if anybody else got any burning issues, but I think it seems to be largely slowing down in terms of questions. Yeah, a couple more comments coming in about the cycle routes specifically. I think if you put those types of comments on the website, that would be really helpful, because they will basically all go into our statement of community involvement, and will be submitted as part of the application to the council when we do the application. But look, guys, I think we kind of okay potentially. Oh, there's another question coming in. Will there be a opportunity for a tour of the site before any work starts? That's probably one for you, Luke. I'm not sure how safe it is, but
yeah, it's not the safest. I mean, I have been in there. I mean, there really isn't anything to see within it at all. It's been stripped completely bare. There's certainly no historical artifacts or anything within it. I mean, it really is just the structure that's been left. As for whether there's an opportunity for a tour, I'd have to take that away, and we can obviously come back to you with that, because there's obviously health and safety considerations there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. Yeah, no, just in response, these comments that you guys are putting on here will be logged as well, so don't worry, they won't go amiss. Well, guys, I think, firstly, thanks for attending, and to the project team, thanks ever so much for giving your time. I found that really engaging and thorough. Unless there's any last kind of burning questions, I will probably end it there. I think that's probably good. I think. Thanks ever so much to everyone for attending, and the project team also. Guys, yeah, we'll be taking these comments down. And if you think of anything else that you want to add, please visit the website, and we'll of course take that into consideration as well. Thanks ever so much for everyone attending, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes.